Hey guys, today I just wanted to chat about a scale visualization idea that I've been working on with some of my students. You should probably think of it as a way of visualizing the fretboard and enabling you to kind of move more freely around the fretboard when you're improvising. And it's based on the idea of a piano player playing scales. Now if you imagine a piano player playing scales, they would play one fingering pattern per octave generally, and it would reset itself when you got to the new octave. So the idea is that you can kind of take this scale and just rattle up as many octaves as you need to, just repeating the same pattern every time you get to a new octave. Generally that's not the way that we play the guitar, and I was watching a friend playing the piano recently, and I kind of thought to myself, well, you know, why can't we do that? Why can't we just apply that same idea to playing scale it runs on the guitar? So what I did is I thought about a basic major scale, and instead of playing probably a couple of ways that people tend to play major scales, we've got this type of thing, or we've got this kind of thing. Both, perfectly workable, both have the right notes in. I would probably never use this type of thing. I don't like the fact that there's an uneven amounts of notes on the strings and it's kind of a bit too boxy. But these 3-note per string type of ideas I do use quite a lot. It's not what this idea is about though. So what we're going to do here, instead of just playing even numbers of notes on strings and just kind of working up the fretboard, we're going to play a 1-octave pattern that repeats itself every time we get to a new octave. So what we're going to do, in the key of G, we'll do all of this in the key of G actually, just to keep it all simple, is we'll play up 1 octave like this. And we're essentially just going to shift a position up when you get to the 7th. Doesn't have to be a slide, it could be that you just move up, but the idea is that you move up when you get to the 7th so that you use your first finger for both the 7th and the root. And what that means is that you then get to a root in the new octave as well, and you can repeat the same pattern again until you run out of fretboard space. You've just got to bear in mind that the B string is tuned slightly different to the rest of the strings, so once you get to a B string, you've always got to compensate by shifting 1 fret further this way than you would have imagined. As long as you remember that, you'll be fine. So that's the idea. It's pretty simple. We just take 1-octave patterns. We can apply it to any scale, any mode, any key, and we just play up the fretboard this way, playing 1-octave patterns. So the next step to using this for your improvising then would be to take the key of G, for instance, and find all the G's on the fretboard and play the same pattern. So for instance, we just started on the 3rd fret here on the bottom string, but there's also a G to be found at the 15th fret on the same string. So you could play the same pattern starting from the 15th fret. It'll get a bit squashed up when you reach the top, but it is possible. And then you've got a G at the 10th fret on the A string. You've got a G on the 5th fret on the D string, and so on. So you're just finding all the G's on the fretboard, starting a major scale from those G's and working all the way up till you run out of frets and strings at the top. And the idea is that once you find a G or an area of the fretboard that you're not familiar with, you concentrate on that and try and memorize it to the point where you can use that in a solo because you've memorized that area of the fretboard and that particular G. So the next step to using this method then, we've gone over the pattern, we've gone over finding all the roots on the fretboard and doing the same thing. So the next step then would be to start the scale from the 4th note. And the reason that this is useful is if you imagine this is the first 3 notes. The 4th note comes as the first note on the next string group. So if we start the scale on the 4th note, what we can do is we can essentially cover every single note on the fretboard that's in G major. So what I mean by that, I'll explain it, is that if we start in C here, then we go across the entire fretboard and find all the C's, just like we did with the G's. Now I'm saying G and C, this is obviously in the key of G major. If we were in the key of C major, it'd be C for the root and F for the 4th and so on. But you've just got to change that in accordance to whatever key you're working in. So what you do, you find all the C's and you start the same pattern starting all the C's. So for instance, we've got another C at the 8th fret on the bottom string here. So we can take the same pattern and just work that up the fretboard. And you've just got to bear in mind that when you reach that B string, you've got to shift it all up 1 fret, because then it'll all be, you know, in the proper notes. So the last step to using this as an improvisational tool then is to just take these ideas, take these scale patterns and try and create 8th note or 16th note lines, depending on what tempo you're in. Don't worry too much about phrasing, really just keeping it simple, but trying to create lines that interlink between all the different 1 octave groups. So essentially what you want to be doing is when you're improvising, say you're around here, you want to be looking for the next available G on the fretboard. So we could go to this G, because that's kind of straightforward. And once we get up to here, we can try and work towards this G here, or we can try and work our way towards this G. But what you're doing is you're creating links between all these little 1 octave patterns that you've found all over the fretboard. And the links are probably going to be the groups that start on the 4th note. So for instance, if we start here, we've got an option to either shift position up to here and carry on with the 4th note starting notes, or we can carry on the A string. So essentially what you've done there by charting out all these 1 octave patterns, you've covered every single note in the key of G on the fretboard, and now it's really just up to you to play about with it and create some 8th note lines. Don't worry about the phrasing, just try and link them all together, just over, you know, a simple G major backing track. And the more you do it, the more you'll kind of make it your own, as it were. You'll find that you get bored of just playing 8th note lines, so the phrasing will start to come in there by itself, and you know, the connection to the chords that you're playing will start to come in there yourself, because initially you can't really think too much about chord tones and phrasing because you're just concentrating on finding the areas of the fretboard. But as it gets more accomplished, you'll start to do that as well. So hopefully that was useful. I'm going to do another lesson about this particular concept in which we'll be applying it to modes and some other scales. But that's all for now, and I'll be back soon with another one.